All right, so let's come back in here. Water scorpion, there you go. Actually, damn it, why'd you do that, Simon? What was that for? Was that for Google? I was just about to Google it, and I'm like, oh man, there's all sorts of water bugs that you could look at that could give you good ideas, like pontoons on the feet and stuff like that. But anyways, all right, let me go into my dude here. So let's see. I'm going to point that critical eye at my silhouette now, and sort of take my initial ideas and see what makes sense and see what doesn't. So I like the idea of what I have here, right? But I think that this doesn't make sense. He feels like he has broken legs in the back, and it's not really reading what I want it to read like, which is more like a, I don't know, more tentacle-like coming in the back, or more tendril-like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask off this area and see what the silhouette is going to look like. And the great thing about working digitally is you always have Control-Z, right? And you always have saved versions. So there's never a good excuse as to why you can't experiment. Now at this point, if I do this, these are really just, it's an aesthetic element, right? It's not anything that's going to come into, you know, his attack just yet, at least not the way that I have it right now. Let's give those things some volume. Let's remesh. And then try and balance this out. All right, I think I know what I'm going to do with this now. I think I'm going to leave that as is, and then I'm just going to make small pair of back legs here. Let's go ahead and bump up my Dynamesh resolution. Keep with the split that I have in the front legs and then mirror that. And then I think I'm good with that on the bottom. I should probably mimic that somehow in the front legs. I want to keep a language moving here. So I want to keep the same design language is what I'm saying. Man, you guys make me feel so insecure about my piece now. Your work is totally dope. Really stoked to see those whips. All right. So I'm starting something here, and I have a line here. I'm now looking across the back. I think I'm going to raise this up a little bit. Let's come back here. And I'm starting conservatively, but I'll end up being a little bit more flamboyant after I kind of get my ideas all together and flushed out. So I'm keeping with the same design. Like I said, I'm just pushing it a little bit further. It's sort of, I gave you guys your notes on Monday, and I gave you a few notes today. And now I'm giving myself my notes and incorporating that. Let's see, I want this neck to be able to reach the ground, right? So it's sort of like, how is he going to attack? I'm thinking about that. Well, he has these here. He has this gaping mouth. Maybe this isn't something he bites with. Maybe he projects something out of here to attack with, raining down acid spit or something. This is cool. This has the potential to be cool. And I'm going to start just tying this in with everything else. Let's turn back on perspective. Let's look from the bottom and see how it's reading, because that's just from the side. So if I look from the bottom, I'm not seeing much of anything, and this is where he's going to be seen most often from. Maybe from like, let me straighten out a little bit. Maybe from like here, from a distance, and then from like here, right? So I have to think about this in terms of scale, and that's why this week's module is all about capturing the scale, sculpting out scale, right? So we have to always keep this in mind. Come in, check at it from the player's perspective and see what they're looking at and what they're going to see. And that's going to tell you where you really need to place things. Because do I need to do a lot of elaborate stuff on the back if the majority of the time he's just going to be seen from underneath or from the side or from a front view like this? Do I need to come in here and do hyper detail here? No. I need to look at where I need to put my attention. So I'm looking down here, and my feet are going to need to be interesting. My legs, my limbs become much more important than maybe they do on some other creatures, that have a smaller scale. So I'm going to start looking at each individual limb. And I'm going to look at the silhouettes of each limb and figuring out how exactly they're constructed. How thick are the joints? These are probably going to be some fairly complex feet. Let's bring out some toes. Starting to think about the anatomy and the bones inside of here. Just trying to determine where my joints are going to sit. And this is, it's all still really rough. So I'm not married exactly to the proportion of everything. It's just sort of like I'm making notes around here. I'll have to go back, and we'll go back and refine this. And we'll go through a couple waves of refinement on our characters. We're not going to be like, okay, well, we got everything there, and now we just need to sculpt it out and do some production work and elaborate on it. We're going to go, okay, we're going to examine and then re-examine. This is, these bosses are what people work for so hard. Aside from like, I don't know, the experience of just being in an environment of a game and appreciating the landscape. Ultimately, what they're there to see is how big of a spectacle, how cool are the fights, how cool is the design, right? And these are your bookends, right, for each chapter, or they're your final bookend, however you want to look at your character. And they should be stunningly beautiful. They should have a level of perfection that doesn't exist inside some of your, like your grinding, the creatures you're grinding on to get to these guys. Because that's why you are grinding in an RPG, is to be able to get to that boss battle and get the rare loot and all that sort of stuff. So we want to make them especially cool. I'm looking at these limbs right now as if they're their own character. I'm looking at them as if the rest of the creature didn't exist. So if all I was seeing was the foot, then this in itself would be an interesting part just to be staring at. If I'm sitting here and I'm grinding and I'm fighting in a 50-man battle or 60-man battle or a 100-man battle against this thing, and I have to stare at this foot, there damn well better be some really cool texture and stuff for me to look at here. There better be something going on. So right now, as I'm examining just this foot, I'm trying to think of that. I'm trying to think of what's interesting. If I were just to look at this, what makes for an interesting shape there? And I want to do that with every part of the characters. I remember sitting there in, I played Final Fantasy XI Online a lot. I think I might have mentioned that. I beta tested it. And I remember going through some of those battles, and I was just like, man, I'm staring at this creature's butt, and there's nothing. I'm staring at his butt, and I want to be looking at his face. I want to see what he's doing up front, the front of the character. Because this was not interesting at all. So I think that you have to make little interesting areas all the way around. Think about it as not as when you're at this scale, you're not just building a creature that physiologically makes sense, that anatomically makes sense. You're looking at something that is entertaining to get lost in detail, right? Because you don't ever get to see the whole thing for the most part. You're looking at parts. And I don't know if I'm belaboring the point with you guys, but I hope you get what I'm saying.